Before we begin, please make sure that you're subscribed. A lot of people have noticed that they've been unsubscribed recently. Every like and comment really helps the channel, so if you enjoy the stories, please show your support. Okay, before I get into the story, there's a few things I need to explain about my country, South Africa, for you to fully understand the story. In South Africa, it's normal to have high brick walls with electric gates, electric fences, and alarms. The crime here is hectic. It's also pretty normal to have big gardens. My family and I are big animal lovers, so at the time we had 6 dogs. 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers, and 2 dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely around the garden as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's normal to have a live-in maid and a gardener. Like, the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. For the story, our maid is Ellie and our gardener is Vince. So this happened in 2007 when I was 9 years old. My older brother was 10 and we had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprised us after work. You may think we were quite young to have phones, but it was used for emergencies or to communicate with our parents. Anyways, it's an important piece of info for the story. We don't usually leave our veranda door open at night due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night. So of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room setting up our new cell phones, all excited. Ellie's daughter, who was 18, was like an older sister to us, and she was helping my brother and I. My dad was somewhere in the house and my mom was in the bath. I specifically remember the maid's daughter making a comment about how the dogs would not shut up and how annoying it was. That's why I noticed it as well. Sure, they bark, but it was usually the dachshunds that yapped when the bigger dogs just chilled. Plus, it would only happen for a few minutes, then they'd get over it. Something was different that night, as even the bigger dogs were barking non-stop. My dad appeared in our room and mentioned to us that he also noticed the dogs' incessant barking and he was going to check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off in my head, and I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother asked to investigate with him and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad said he had a terrible feeling because of this and because of how out of character the dogs were acting. He called after them. They usually come running, but tonight they all seemed to just look at him. They then turned back around and continued going crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother not to come with him because of this off feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dogs seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out of view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched to the steps, and just as he realized what was happening, it was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet and avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple and immediately knew it was a gun. 4 men in balaclavas stepped out of the darkness, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive and asked him where my brother was. He said that he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. My dad said something came over him, and before he knew what he was saying, he responded by saying he's gone inside to press the panic button. As he said it, he saw how all of these guys started to panic. They started speaking in an African language called Zulu, assuming my dad couldn't understand, because it's not common for white people to speak it. But my dad had actually grown up on a farm where he learned it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy holding the gun said, in Zulu, "Shit. The cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this guy, grab what we can, and leave." The others seemed apprehensive, and a smaller guy seemed really on edge and continued to say how he can't go back to jail again. And they need to get out of there before the cops show, which would be any minute. He was panicking. My dad then took advantage of this guy's fear. My dad interrupted them, speaking English, pretending to not understand what they're saying, and said that we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area, and since my brother pushed the panic button so long ago, they'll probably be here any second. And that did the trick. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them. The smaller, scared guy started freaking out all of the other guys, saying that they need to leave ASAP, or else they'd be caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves. Their plan was slowly turning to shit, as a third guy had put it. The aggressive guy pointing the gun to my dad's head slowly lowered it as they started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto his crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart towards the house. As luck would have it, as my dad ran into the veranda door, my oblivious brother was heading out with a torch. My dad scooped him up under his arm and sprinted into the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quick as possible without even thinking. The maid's daughter and I were obviously also oblivious to everything when my dad rushed through the bedroom door, slammed it shut, and told us to go upstairs into the attic. There's 5 guys outside with guns. They're here to hurt us. Get upstairs now. My heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs. My mom ran out of the bathroom in a towel, not too far behind. We sat there in the darkness and silence. I swear you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just waiting to hear something below us in the rooms. My mom cursed, saying she didn't have a phone, and neither did my dad. But as luck would have it, in my hand was my brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than now, right? My mom dials the police, and I kid you not, when they asked where we lived, they told us it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry. Click. The line goes dead. We're now not only shitting ourselves, but we're flabbergasted. My mom starts cursing like a sailor again, and that's when my dad realizes, damn. He didn't close the veranda door, and what about Ellie and Vince, who are in their rooms, blissfully unaware of the danger they're in? He gets his firearm in the safe in the attic and tells us that whatever we hear, to not come downstairs. To stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad not to leave us, but he tells us he has to go get the others before something bad happens to them. Now there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. The maid's daughter is understandably in hysterics, because she's also fearing for her mom downstairs. My dad disappears and the air is thick with tension. We can still hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that those men were still on our property. My mom then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say they'll be over in about 10 to 15 minutes. They say to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all wait in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating these men are in our house. But there was just silence. The only sound was the dog's barks outside. After what seemed like hours, most likely a couple minutes, we heard stomping coming up the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was my dad, with Ellie and Vince. Luckily, it was. We all hid for a while, no one dared to speak. The dogs seemed to have calmed down considerably, but were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang and my dad told us to wait while he checked if it was the security company, and sure enough, it was. He opened up and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up and my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police for our jurisdiction, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there were actually 7 pairs of footprints and that these guys had bent the spikes on our wall and just climbed over. We got an electric fence shortly after. So there must have been 2 other guys hiding in the shadows that my dad hadn't seen. which is actually creepy in its own right. South Africa's violent crime is quite bad, and it's sickeningly common for torture and other terrible things to happen during home invasions. I was obviously so young at the time, I didn't know the horrors of the world and was just scared of my family getting hurt. Now that I'm older, just the thought of 4 women being in the house and my mom being in nothing but a bath towel gives me the chills to this day. The cops said the fact that there were so many guys, instead of like 1 to 3, indicates that these guys possibly had sinister intentions. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button. Also, I'm so glad my dad understands Zulu and could manipulate the situation to benefit us. Lastly, my family will forever be in debt to our good boys and girls that warned us that night. A terrifying and life-changing outcome would have 100% happened had it not been for our incredible dogs. From that day onwards, my dad always gave them leftover rice or meat with their dinner. I'm sure there was a special place in heaven reserved for you angels. If you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. Hello. I'm a 20-year-old French girl. I'm sorry in advance if there are any mistakes, hope you can understand me. To set the context, I live in a suburb in a small residence with 6 houses. My gate is often broken, and most of the time it's wide open, giving easy access to our small courtyard. My house has 1 floor with 4 bedrooms, including mine. Downstairs, there's a guest bedroom which we use as a treatment room due to my health issues. It's where we keep all the equipment and medicines. I also have a dog who means the world to me. He feels everything and even senses my epileptic seizures before they happen. He can even tell when the nurses are arriving by the sound of their tires in our yard. He never barks unless there's a problem. A nurse visits me 4 to 5 times a day for treatments, including infusions. This is an important part of my story. One morning, as usual, my nurse, Sandra, arrived at 8 a.m. She administered my treatment, and we chatted like we always did. After about 40 minutes, she left, saying she might be a little late next time, but I shouldn't be worried. That day, my parents were at work, and I had a medical appointment in the morning. I was home alone, except for the nurse's visits every 4 hours. When I returned from my appointment, I sat on the sofa with my dog while waiting for the next nurse. When I heard tire noises, I thought it was Sandra arriving a bit early. My dog started growling, which was unusual. I looked at the time, 11:50 a.m. I assumed Sandra might have switched with the previous patient, as she sometimes did. I heard a knock and I went to the door. I saw a young woman I had never met before. She introduced herself as Camille, a 3rd year at nursing school, and explained that Sandra had sent her to prepare my treatment. I wasn't suspicious. I was used to students coming over. But I was a bit surprised because Sandra usually informed me in the morning or sent a message. Also, she never left a student alone on the first visit. I led Camille to the treatment room and showed her the way. While she washed her hands, my dog's behavior became strange. He growled as she approached me and circled me, so I decided to leave him in the living room and close the door to keep him calm. I didn't pay much attention to what Camille was doing. I was on my phone at that moment. Then, I noticed she was preparing a syringe rather than using the pre-made saline syringe as usual. I glanced up and saw that my treatment ampoules were untouched, but I had heard the distinct sound of ampoules breaking. Something felt off. As she approached me with the syringe, I received a message from Sandra saying she'd be there in 5 minutes and asked me to start setting up the equipment. I made up an excuse, telling Camille that I needed to use the restroom and left her in the treatment room. My dog kept barking and growling. When I reached the toilet downstairs, I sent Sandra a message telling her about the woman, and she had no idea what I was talking about. I was terrified and started crying in the bathroom. Camille came to check on me and asked if everything was okay. I assured her it was, and that's when I heard the front door slam shut. 2 minutes later, it reopened, and I heard Sandra's voice. I left the bathroom, still crying, and Sandra asked me what had happened. I explained the situation and showed her the treatment room. We called the police, who arrived, examined the evidence, and took samples from the syringe and other items prepared by Camille. The test results were shocking. The syringe contained a paralyzing substance, enough to paralyze a 120 kilograms man, and the IV contained a highly concentrated medicine that could have stopped anyone's heart. To this day, we don't know who Camille really was. Thankfully, I never heard from her again. She had stolen all my opioids but left my tablet and computer untouched. Looking back, I realized my dog had sensed Camille's ill intentions. I should have been more vigilant, especially since she was a stranger and on her own. My treatments are far from simple. I often wonder what could have happened if I hadn't checked my phone that day. I had blocked this story from my memory until my girlfriend reminded me of it a couple days ago. I started dating my girlfriend at the end of my senior year, and I used multiple dating apps before we started dating. I had my Snapchat listed in many of my dating app profiles. This is important. Nothing led to anything with the apps. I talked to people for a bit and eventually the conversation would die out. When I began dating my girlfriend, I had deleted the apps but never deleted my account, meaning people could still see my profile and my Snapchat account. I realized this after a few people would add me, but it didn't bother me much because I'd tell them I had a girlfriend. As you would imagine, the conversation would end at that point. But there was this one guy that added me, let's call him Adam. And he asked me if I was available. Being straight, I was used to guys adding me, so I gave him the usual response. Sorry, I'm straight and I have a girlfriend. I expected him to leave me alone, but it didn't stop him. At first the messages were normal. How was your day? What did you do today? Simple stuff like that. Being the nice guy I am, I responded because I thought this guy just wanted to be friends, and adding a gay friend is okay with me. Then the messages progressively got more creepy. He started asking questions about my girlfriend, and not the basic questions. As the days passed, I started to notice that Tyler's vocabulary was very similar to Adam's. I wasn't sure about it, so I didn't make any assumptions that it was him. I shared Tyler's Snapchat with my girlfriend, who added him to investigate. As soon as she added Tyler's snap, Tyler flipped out on her, confirming that it was indeed Adam. Realizing this, I blocked him again. After that, everything went quiet from Adam for about a month. I live in the suburbs of Chicago, and both my girlfriend and I live down the street from each other. We often see each other, and our families are good friends. Anyway, a month went by until I received a letter with no address or name on it, just my name on the front. I opened it, and to my shock and horror, it was basically a love letter from Adam. The letter expressed his love for me and his desire for me to run off with him. The letter took a very sexual turn halfway through, with explicit descriptions of what he wanted to do to me. At that moment, I had two horrifying realizations. One was that he knew my address, and two, he had dropped off the letter himself, meaning he was in my town. I immediately called my girlfriend, who was equally shocked. After consulting with my parents, we called the cops. Unfortunately, since I had blocked and removed Adam's social media information and the letter had no return address, there was nothing we could do about it. Day after day, letters kept appearing in my mailbox until they also started showing up at my girlfriend's place. Her letters were far worse than mine. Adam wrote about how much he hated her and how he wanted to hurt her. He described in detail the ways he would inflict pain on her until she broke up with me. Like me, she reported this to the police, but they could do nothing about it. My girlfriend's family had plans to go to Hawaii for vacation, and I was house-sitting for them. The first couple of days went fine until one of the last nights of the week. As usual, I was at their house, watching TV on the couch, when the power went out. It was around 1 a.m., and it was pitch black. The next few seconds were silent, and then I heard a window smash from the office. To help you understand the layout of the house, when you entered the front door, the living room was on your left. Straight ahead were both the kitchen and stairs, and to the right were the office and dining room. Upstairs, as soon as you reached the top of the stairs, there was a bathroom straight ahead. My girlfriend's room was on the right, and the other bedrooms were on the left. I immediately grabbed a kitchen knife and ran upstairs to hide while I called the cops. I quickly got into my girlfriend's room and slipped into the closet. As soon as I was able to contact the operator, I heard the intruder pounding up the steps. Thankfully, I had relayed all the information to the operator in time, and she stayed on the phone as we both remained quiet. The intruder took a left when he reached the top of the stairs, which gave more time for the cops to arrive and for me to get ready, just in case I needed to defend myself. A few minutes passed until I heard the intruder start walking toward my girlfriend's room. In the precious seconds I had, I slipped out of the closet and positioned myself next to the door. As soon as he opened the door and started to enter the room, I took the kitchen knife and drove it into his shoulder. A young man screamed in pain as I heard a heavy metallic object make a large thud as it hit the ground. From there, I bolted out of the house, where I was met by 4 squad cars and cops with their guns raised. I raised my hands, shouting that he was upstairs in the right room. A few minutes passed, and the intruder was dragged out, still screaming in pain. With the siren lights flooding the street, I got a glimpse of his face. It was Adam. Later, an officer informed me that the metallic thud was caused by him dropping his handgun. Adam was from Texas and had traveled up to my state to be with me. He had rented a room at a local motel and would put letters in both my girlfriend's and my mailbox daily. He was doing this in the early hours of the morning. This was confirmed by the security footage from the motel he was staying at. On the night of the break-in, Adam had plans to kill my girlfriend and her family so that I would choose to be with him. He managed to pry open the power box, switched off the power to her house along with neighboring houses, and broke in with the intention of her being there. Well, unfortunately for him, she was enjoying a tropical vacation. To be honest, I have no idea how the outcome would have been different if they hadn't gone on vacation, and I am grateful that I still have my girlfriend as well as her family alive. So, to any stalkers out there, please stay away from my girlfriend. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I will never forget the feeling deep in my chest. Both that night and the next morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent. It was late December in a small Texas town. We just received 5 inches of snow earlier in the morning. I can't remember what time it was. All I remember is it was dark outside, and I was playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 parts, a mudroom with a door leading out front, then my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wood door with all the old hardware, and had a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the frontmost, with my parents' room being in the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt something weird. Like someone was watching me. I was facing the door at this point and looked right up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade, staring for any reason to feel unsafe and run. After a while, I was sure that there was nothing, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I got the feeling again. This time I didn't look at the door, but instead moved so that my back was now to the door, hoping that it was all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door, like the doorknob had been touched. I was still turned around. I was completely frozen at the metal sound of the doorknob. It was moving. I didn't know how or why, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I wanted to move, but I was frozen. It was like someone glued every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents had been in the shower, all the way at the back of the house, leaving me at the front all alone. The only room lit up was mine. Suddenly, the knob was not being gently moved, someone was turning it with force. This door was one that had to be locked from the inside so the knob could turn and open freely. Luckily, there were 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the knob was free to open. As soon as I heard it turn all the way, I sprung up to the wall about 5 feet from the door, my back to the wall. The door fell silent. I found myself glued to the wall, unable to move. Then, the knob turned slowly. I remember watching, waiting for it to turn all the way. When it did, whoever was on the other side started trying to budge the door and pry. At first, it was easy going, but then they started pounding into the door with their foot. They got only 2 kicks in when I unfroze and screamed for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked what was wrong, and I said someone tried to break in. They ran over and checked, not bothering to look outside, which I pleaded them to. They just said my imagination was running wild and it was an animal or the old age of the house. They took one final look in my mudroom, not bothering to investigate any further. I was told to go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember falling asleep. All I remember is staring at the door from my bed, never taking my eyes off the doorknob. Suddenly, I was woken up by my parents, who were obviously distressed and seemed to be scared. My mom grabbed me by both shoulders and got right in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought someone tried to break in. When I told them this time, they seemed to listen. I was worried how serious they were as they asked me about everything. When I was done, they said they had to show me something. They took me to the front door and out to the front yard, pointing to my door near the driveway. You could clearly see the boot prints in the snow, walking along the street through our yard and straight to my window, then my mudroom door, where I had been playing the night before. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever came of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house. I can never forget what it felt like as a child to go through this and not have my parents believe me. I'm just glad I was not home alone and very thankful for that strong door. If you're a fan of the video, please subscribe. I always love reading your opinions in the comments. About 10 years ago, I lived on my own and didn't have much company. I was quite depressed at the time after losing my girlfriend to a drunk driver. I was enjoying a beer and watching the sunset on the back porch when I saw a massive scruffy man emerging from the tree line. My heart skipped a beat as he stumbled towards my house in a menacing way. Living alone, I often used my backyard for target practice. And at that moment, I was immensely grateful for it. Instinctively, I rushed to bolt all the doors while frantically dialing the police. What I didn't know was that this intruder had broken in the day before through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. He had left the basement door unlocked, and at this point, he made his way inside the house and was making his way up the stairs towards me. I gripped my rifle, aiming it at the approaching man as he descended the hallway. I shouted at him, ordering him to stop and get on the ground, but he just kept walking towards me. I fired the first round, loaded with rock salt, but he showed no reaction. I quickly followed with a rubber bullet to the chest. Yet the drugged-up guy, who was clearly out of his mind, continued advancing. This guy was huge, at least twice my size, and I realized that whatever drugs he had in his body were going to push him through any pain that a rubber bullet would inflict. He was backing me into a corner. I desperately begged him to stop and warned him what would happen, but he just moaned at me like a zombie and shouted, "Shoot! Do it!" Then he lunged towards me. I took my third shot. It left a gaping hole in his chest. It barely even slowed him down. He kept coming, and in a frenzied struggle, he wrestled me to the ground. He was moaning and coughing up blood. Suddenly, he grabbed my face with both of his massive hands and started squeezing my head. It was utterly terrifying. I could feel him trying to burst my skull open like a balloon. I don't know how long it actually lasted, but it felt like forever. Eventually, the injury finally caught up with him, and he died on top of me. I was laying with him crushing me for a few minutes. My energy was completely drained, and I could barely breathe with his weight on top of me. His body was pushing my rifle into my chest, and it was causing me serious pain when I tilted his body to the side. I was completely drenched in his blood, and I can still remember the overwhelming smell. I'd completely forgotten that I was still on the phone with the operator, who had heard our entire exchange, which more or less amounted to me pleading, "Stop, or I'll shoot," and the man menacingly taunting. The police arrived soon after, and the incident made it to the local papers. There was a criminal investigation, but eventually, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. It turned out that the intruder was wanted for murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow made his way 50 miles up the road into a rural area. It would be amazing to get 100 likes on this video.